Good afternoon, friends. Welcome to the STP training webinar, which is today's Regression Automation Challenge for continuous delivery. Our speaker for the day is Michael Hackett, and I'm Smita Mishra, a professional tester myself, and I'm excited to host you all and Michael on our STP trainings. He's a senior VP with Logigear and very well-respected professional in the industry. Before we start the webinar today, I have a few updates for you. The first one being we have our next conference coming up as Spring 2018 STPCon, which will be held in the Newport Beach, California from April 9th through 12th this year. Our program committee has already selected a range of world-class speakers across the keynotes, the workshops, and the sessions, and you can view the entire program on stpcon.com under the event schedule. The conference topics, as you can see, include automation, agile, performance, DevOps, mobile, security, leadership, strategy, and so much more. We typically have over 20 workshops and over 40 sessions for you to choose from. And the formats are like roundtables, case studies, hands-on exercises, and tool demos. We also have a STP Circle Time, which gives kind of on-spot opportunity, not only for fresh speakers or new speakers who want to do a 5 minutes gig, but also makes for a great platform for seasoned speakers who want to share briefly about something they're working on and are super excited about. Incidentally, our speaker today, Michael Hackett, is also going to do an all-day workshop at the conference. So, Michael, you have been to multiple STP conferences earlier, and that
Yes.
makes me want to ask you, what brings you back to STPCon again and again?
What brings me back to STP? Well, it's a well-run conference, right? So it's a good conference, and that lets me focus on going to sessions and seeing new tools and meeting people. The whole thing is very convenient. It's easy to schedule, and getting around to a lot of workshops is easy. It's not a difficult conference to navigate. It's an easy conference to navigate, and I appreciate that. It lets me see more and do more.
Wow, very nice. So all kudos to the organizers who
Yeah.
really actually
Yep.
do very well job, do very well at this. So did you also get a chance to review the event schedule for the upcoming program where you are speaking to? Any
I did.
particular ones? Okay, so any
Yeah.
particular ones that you are looking forward to attend?
Yeah. So one of the things about, I mean, there's only so much you can do, right? There's only so many areas I can focus on in my work. So I like to see things that I'm currently not doing. So Jane Fraser is doing a project on Internet of Things, and the best thing about Jane's topic on Internet of Things is her company makes robots. Her company makes Internet of Things. So it's not a theoretical thing, it's a real thing. She does it and she tests them and they produce them. So I want to see how they're doing Internet of Things, how they're testing Internet of Things, and how that really impacts these multi-device environments. And they have mobile controllers for these robots, what their test strategies are and how they actually go and test Internet of Things, and not from a theoretical perspective, but how they actually do it, because they've been producing robots for a couple of years now. So I'm excited about that. And there's a topic on Docker. And anytime I see a topic on Docker, I go to a topic on Docker, because Docker, that container tool, people write about it a lot, or they talk about the tool itself, but not as many people talk about how it's implemented and how they're working with it, and particularly how they're testing container-based applications. So I'm definitely going to go to the Docker session and try and get some real-life experience there.
Absolutely. And being a practitioner myself, I have huge respect for practitioners. So definitely Jane is a must-go session.
Yeah.
And Docker is like hotcakes. It's like every day, anywhere it's there's a session on Docker, and it's like the whole world wants to go there. So good. And since we are on the topic, Michael, I'm definitely interested in knowing what is your workshop about.
Well, so my workshop is on test cases, which after talking about IoT and Docker, or a session on machine data that I didn't bring up, those are pretty sophisticated topics. But what I have found in my work when I go to different companies is some people are either unclear or they're missing some of the basics on how to write test cases, on things we take for granted. I mean, the foundation of testing, right? How to write test cases. And I've done this session before, and it's always interesting to me how some people have prejudices about this is the only way to write test cases, and their eyes are really open that there's dozens of ways to write test cases. There's no standard for how you write test cases. Some people have these really complicated test case managers that require you to write test cases in a certain way. To me, the days of those really formalized, document-heavy test cases are gone. I mean, most of us don't have that time, and in Agile, we work so fast that we need more of a just-in-time test design approach. So how you estimate testing times and how you define data when you're doing test cases just in time is complicated for most people. So I decided, instead of talking about a really advanced, sophisticated topic, is to go back to basics, and it has been really well received so far. People are looking for different ways to write test cases, more efficient ways to write test cases. The idea of just-in-time test cases is a surprise to most people. So it's an examination, even if it's a topic that some of us take for granted, of new and better ways to write better test cases.
That really sounds exciting, and I've seen quite a few of your workshops in past. They were always houseful, so I'm sure people love this one too.
Thank you.
Yes. And all of those who have not yet registered, please do register. And also, if you have registered for the conference or are planning to do so soon, then you may want to quickly book your rooms too at the Marriott Hotel, as they are still offering their special rates, which is $199 per night. The offer ends on 16th March or until the rooms sell out. So if you don't want to miss out on this, then please do book your rooms quick. Another quick piece of information that I have for you is that there is an upcoming webinar, Supercharge Your Functional Tests with Visual Powers in 8 Lines of Code, by Gil Tayar, and it's on 14th of March, same time. Gil is an evangelist and senior architect at Applitools, and he is hugely respected in the community. The link is up for you to review and register, so you can go for it. And if you are on Twitter, please share the conference information and about this webinar with your followers and connections. Please do add STP's Twitter handle to your tweets, which is @SoftwareTestPro. You can also add the hashtag STP webinar to your tweets. So anything you like about this webinar, about Michael, please do write it there. Let's get started with the webinar today. A very warm welcome, Michael. We are very thrilled to have you with us today. And let me quickly introduce you formally for all of us here.
Okay.
Michael Hackett is the VP at Logigear, which is a leading-edge software testing technologies company. He heads the training, consulting, and the publishing division. Michael has over 24 years of experience with software engineering and testing in banking, securities, healthcare, and consumer electronics. He is a certified Scrum Master and holds a Bachelor of Sciences in Engineering from Carnegie Mellon University. He has also been a regular instructor at the University of California, Santa Cruz, and Berkeley Extension, Hong Kong Technical University, University of Da Nang, and Huashan University, and the Software Productivity Center in Vancouver. In short, he's traveled globally to teach people. He has trained teams in 16 countries. He has co-authored 2 books, which are Testing Applications on the Web and Global Software Test Automation. So, all right, Michael, very warm welcome again, and the floor is all yours now.
Okay, thank you, Smita. So what we're going to talk about today is the regression challenge with continuous delivery, how continuous delivery changes automated regression suites. So to go through that, I want to talk about what actually is the challenge. What do we have to change to do automated regression in CD? And it's not like it used to be. What some of the problems are if you already have regression suites moving to CD. I want to define what is regression, what is continuous delivery, and then I want to talk about some specific automation topics that we have to resolve, and then present some solutions in a summary and hopefully leave time for some questions at the end. So everybody wants to do continuous delivery. It sounds great. The benefits are unmistakable. Everybody wants to use these tools. A lot of conference topics about it. Continuous delivery is a big goal for a lot of organizations today. But the problem is many organizations have these giant monolithic regression suites that we've been working on for years, right? Automate more, and it's great, but they take at least overnight to run. A lot of organizations who do daily builds, it takes a full overnight to run this regression suite, or up to 5 days, up to 7 days. Sometimes these automated regression suites, you run them on a bunch of virtual machines, can take too many days to run. Another problem here is that not all of our tests are automated. Not everybody has these big, giant, monolithic automation suites. A lot of people have partial manual regressions, full manual regressions, regression test suites that go along with automated regression test suites. Another problem is that some people are very covetous of their tool. Nobody else can run their automation for a bunch of reasons. They have to set up their data manually, or they're the only people who know how to run their tool, or their tool isn't going to pipe in with the kind of pipeline automation tool you're using. And also, any team who wants to do continuous delivery, it needs to run in minutes. Your automated regression suite has to run in minutes, and you need to be able to give the team, or give the automation suite needs to pass back to the tool just a binary yes or no answer, promote or don't promote. And some automated suites are not set up that way to give quick and easy analyzed results, right? Just yes or no. It's good. Can we go on? Or no, we need to stop. Let's talk about where people are on the automation spectrum. Logigear did a big survey series last year, and one of the findings that we found was that there is a significant amount of companies that have no automation, where the testing is all manual. So of the survey sample database, survey results, we found that 1 in 5 companies had no automation at all. And I find that in my work when I go to companies. I just in the past week went to a company that's a big publicly traded Fortune 500 company, and they bought a company that is really crucial to their business development. And this company has a great product and no automation at all. They have zero automation. I think many people who are deep in the software development business would be surprised at just how many companies have no automation. And in our survey results, it was actually very few companies had, around 90, what they would consider, this is self-reporting, about 90% of their tests automated, or 75% of their tests automated. The overwhelming majority of companies have somewhere around 25% of their testing automated, or 10% of their testing automated. This is going to lead to a real delay in that organization jumping on the CD bandwagon. So we know that test automation is not optional, right? We also know this idea of automate everything. This automate everything myth is just that. It's a myth. There's no way that people can automate everything. I know I was just reading something about automating everything. And the person was advising, well, automate all your performance tests, but don't automate your UI tests. There's been a lot of conversation back and forth about, can you automate everything? And I think in this agile, fast, dynamic world, the idea that anybody can automate all of their testing is just not, it's never really been valid, and it's particularly not valid today. So much testing now happens at lower levels, where you're relying on developers to either do formalized TDD or informalized TDD, and rely on so many things to be tested at the unit level or at the API level, that automating all of the UI testing that you need is just not practical anymore. Plus, there's a lot of testing that you do during development. Maybe during a sprint, you do a lot of testing that's meant to be collaborative and exploratory and just figuring out how the function works, that you're just not going to automate that. That's not a high value test that you would automate. So we have to dispel this notion that we're going to automate everything, because it's just a myth, and it doesn't help our automation goals. And when I just talked about this survey result, if you go around and a couple of organizations, or you go to a conference like STP and talk to people, you would probably be surprised that some organizations have hundreds of thousands of tests that are running on all kinds of virtual machines, and they're running 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and they keep this constant stream of hundreds of thousands of tests running. That's great. There are a lot of organizations with thousands or tens of thousands of tests. There are a lot of organizations that have hundreds of tests, and they think that's enough automation for them. And as I said a minute ago, surprisingly big number of companies that have no automation at all. Well, every team, regardless of where you are on that spectrum, is going to have hurdles to get through to continuous delivery. So some other problems that are going to block us from jumping on this continuous delivery practice. There are a lot of automation suites that have lots of false positives and false negatives, and the analysis takes a long time. Or you may have to manually set up data before a run, or mirror back data, or data's hard to manage before you run your suite. So there's people who they love their tool, but their tool has some issues. They love their code product, it has some issues. Their scripts have some issues. The whole thing put together is a little bit of a mess that takes a lot of care to run. And it's not an easy, self-contained, seamless set of, automated tool, code, and automated scripts. Also, for virtually every company that I talk to, the automation maintenance time is high. And sometimes people will let a bunch of failed tests slide just because they know what the tests are, they know what the change set is for the code, and even if they get a bunch of fails, they know the areas it changed, and if the failed tests aren't in the change area, they'll just let it slide. This is not a good practice over the long term, and when CD is based on testing so fast and getting code to production so fast, that's kind of dangerous. Also, another situation that's going to block us is if you have a giant regression, and giant could be anything. Giants could still be in the hundreds, giants could be in the thousands, based on your opinion. There are a lot of organizations that have a pass rate where they say, okay, well, we have all this giant automation. It's really great, but we have a bunch of tests that fail for either cascading failures or timeout failures, or because there's a change in the code, or because we didn't maintain those tests. And it's too difficult to go back and analyze those on the fly, on a daily basis. So they'll just say, okay, well, as long as we get 90% of the tests that pass, we're going to say we're good because we don't have time to go back and analyze those, or 80% of the tests pass. Well, let's say you have 5,000 tests and you say, okay, we're going to have a 90% pass rate. That's a really high pass rate. That still means that 10% of the tests fail. That still means that that if you have 5,000 tests, 500 tests fail, and you're not going to go back and analyze those because you're too busy working on the new functionality and moving things to the next step. That's kind of dangerous. So any hope of doing this continuous delivery or pipeline automation in these states it's a little risky. It's pretty risky. It's unsustainable. So how did we get here? We got here because there's this idea in some companies that every test has to be automated. Okay, well, that sounds fine, and somebody may want to argue about that, but the problem is that when every test is automated, you wind up with a lot of low-value automated tests, or you wind up with these suites that have multiple thousands or tens of thousands of tests that they might not really have a high value in the long term. Some teams automated tests just because they could. They got a tool, and the tool specialized in one type of thing, and they're like, I can do this. This is great. I'm going to automate a whole bunch of these tests, regardless of whether they were important tests or not, or high-value tests, or well-designed tests, low-maintenance tests. Sometimes we, in the software business, we set a bunch of engineers at a tool and said, okay, go for it. Just go and automate as much as you can, and low-value tests may have gotten automated. Or because somebody had some kind of mythical number that, well, some industry standard is 75% of your tests need to be automated, and that 75% meant something when it doesn't. That you need to automate some magical number, and if you have all these manual tests, automate 75% of them and we're in good shape. But we know that's not really a good reason to automate tests. A more practical and current problem I see is that a lot of organizations have a definition of done from their sprints that part of the definition of done is every acceptance criteria has to have an automated test. Well, that may sound fine and that may sound good, but over years and years and years, you're going to build a whole lot of tests. And one of the problems we're going to discuss a little bit more later is, okay, what happens 2 years later? We go and retire a user story or update a user story. Well, you have all those tests, all those automated tests written for that acceptance criteria. Many organizations are slow to go back and either know where those tests are or just retire those tests, pull those tests. So when you have a good idea, like every acceptance criteria in your definition of done has to be automated, you're going to wind up with, over time, big, large suites. Well, I think at some point we're going to need to stop doing this and be making more intelligent choices about what are the tests we're going to automate and what are not the tests. What are the tests we're not going to automate? And in a very good and positive way, some people have also just been very aggressive about how much they automate for a long time. You know, Selenium's been around for a long time. Test Architect's been around for a long time. Test Complete's been around for a long time. SOAP UI's been around for a long time now. There's lots of 15-year-old automation tools that people have been automating thousands and thousands of tests over the years, and are really good at it and have gigantic suites that people feel nervous often about pulling old tests, deleting old tests, right? But we really have to make a shift now to get in this continuous delivery thing, tests to run in minutes, not tests to run in 7 days. So we're going to have some tough decisions ahead of us, which is what we're going to tackle because it's doable. One issue I'd like to toss out to get you to kind of thinking in this way is, how do you deal with rollbacks, or how do you deal with a hotfix, or talking about containers, how do you deal with swapping out a container? How do you deal with a very small change set going live? So if I have my big regression suite that takes 5 days to run, or we have this daily build process, but I have a full overnight of automated tests to run. What happens if I have a hotfix going in and I'm just going to make one change? What automated test do you run? How do you figure out what is the small set of tests that we can run if we have a hotfix that's going in it's going in this afternoon, it's going in by the end of the day? How do I choose what is this smaller set of tests that I'm going to run? That's a problem for a lot of organizations. We obviously, if you have 5 days worth of automation, you can't wait 5 days to put the hotfix in. Some teams have this handled, and we're going to talk about a couple of the solutions that people can use. But what I find is that most teams do not. They'll just maybe manually do an exploratory set of tests around that change set and hope that that's good enough. And that may be the situation you wind up doing, but that's going to be difficult for CD. Okay, so what do we need for CD? For CD, we need fast running, immediate feedback that's easy to run by the tool, easy to troubleshoot, that if the suite craps out and fails, somebody else can go in and get it running again and have our suite run. It's easy to analyze, and it's meaningful test organization. When I talked earlier about high value tests, the tests they're actually giving us good feedback, good, clean, immediate feedback to say, yeah, we're in good shape or not. So a lot of teams have to rethink what they're going to automate and when they run the automation. So what they automate. When I talked about high value tests, whether you test something at the UI level or whether you test something at the unit level, what you automate and when you run them. That we may be running these 5 days of this giant monolithic automation suite, but that might run in the background on a different set of servers and not be our primary information feed as to the quality of the product. We may be running smaller sets of tests and run those in the CD suite. So, and even in the CD suite, a CD pipeline, when we run certain tests is going to be crucial to how we set things up. So that's the situation we're in. What I want to do is I want to go back and do some basic definition stuff to get us a better understanding of what we're talking about here. So the first thing I want to talk about is regression. I find regression is the most misunderstood word in software development, and particularly software testing these days. So what is regression? Regression is an instance, act or instance of regressing, going backward. It's a trend or shift to a lower or less perfect state. It's revision to an earlier state. So like if your mom says you're regressing back to your childhood, that means you were a 5-year-old, now you're acting like a 5-year-old again. You're regressing, you're going backwards. So anytime we go back and do again, go back to a previous state, that's regressing. So when you're testing, a regression test is you run tests again and again to show that you're not going backwards. We're not going back to a previous state. So when we build this regression test suite that every organization has these days, how do you choose what tests you run? And what's the goal, and what are you trying to do? Sometimes people say they run regression to show that nothing breaks. Well, can you really show that nothing breaks, or can you show that something broke? Showing that nothing happened is difficult. There's a new word people use. If you read any books on CD or you go to some other presentations on these CD tools, people talk more about showing consistency, and that a regression suite, automated testing, is about showing consistency. Now, I know it's a subtle difference between saying maybe nothing broke to showing consistency, but it's a different mindset. It's a different idea about regression testing and continuous delivery. We're showing that if we have this product at a certain state, and we test it, these are the results we get. If we make a change, the results we get are consistent with what we had yesterday, or consistent with what we had earlier in the day, or consistent with what we have in production now. That's kind of the new mantra with regression testing, is it's to show consistency. So when you want to show consistency and you have this regression suite, what are the tests you run? Most people instantly think, well, I just rerun my regression. I rerun my automated tests. I rerun all the tests. But I think when we go deeper into that, we really have to define it better than all tests. What I brought up a couple of times already is that sometimes people automated low value tests, or they value tests because they could, or they're about the meeting criteria of the definition of done. Also, I brought up this idea of a hotfix. If somebody finds a bug in production, but you've run your regression suite, clearly that bug wasn't found in the regression suite. Rerunning the regression suite is not going to find that bug, or another bug, perhaps another bug that might have been caused by that fix. So this idea of running all tests, I think, is a little bit too easy. When you say you run your regression suite, what is it actually that you're running? Do you run just your priority ones? Do you run your priority ones and priority twos? A lot of organizations have structured their tests based on running certain priorities certain times. It may be the priority 1 test cases get run in the daily build, the priority 1 and 2 test cases get run each sprint, maybe the whole entire automated regression suite gets run over the course of a release. Well, we need to clean this up and have a better definition of what tests get run where if we're going to be moving to CD. More commonly, though, I find that organizations have some kind of definition, even sometimes it's unstated, that regression is about either the happy path or the most common paths, or they'll build regression suites around bugs that get found. They'll automate every bug and make sure that those bugs don't come back, because bugs have a habit of going away and coming back sometimes. Or the regression suites are built around a change set, or the regression suites are built around core functionality or main functionality, or they'll have various degrees of smoke tests. They'll have a really fast smoke test, and they'll have a sanity test that tests what they consider basic functionality. Each of these is a different definition of regression testing. Now, I want to talk about those. I don't want to talk anymore about the definitions, but I want to talk about what those definitions imply. So if I say I have something like a full regression, the time to execute that is going to be long. That's going to be a long time, and the coverage is going to be high. And if the coverage is high, the risk is low. That sounds good, but if my full regression takes days and days to execute, that's a problem. If I have my regression suite is really core functionality, that's going to take a lot less. The time to execute that is going to be a lot faster than some kind of full regression, but the coverage is lower. And if the coverage is lower, the risk is higher. If I have regression built around most common paths, which is different than core functionality. Whether people talk about 80-20 rules, that 80% of the users use only 20% of the code, or we have website analytics, so we pulled out these most common paths that people use, or we've defined happy paths, or marketing has defined paths for us that we have to do. Okay, most common paths. The time to execute that is going to be pretty quick, but the coverage on it is going to be a lot lower, so the risk is going to be a lot higher. Now, that's all fine, and as test teams, now that this is what I've laid out as the problem, we could understand this pretty straightforward. The problem is, to me, that not everybody on the team would understand that. I meet POs, I meet product people. If you have project managers, I meet people, certain Scrum Masters, who the idea of regression means you clearly running everything, when to the team it could mean, well, it's only our happy paths, or it's only the most common paths. We're actually not running everything. So one of the things that we're going to do moving forward, we have to do moving forward in CD, is get a much better definition of what our regression actually is. That when we say we're going to test run our regression suite that's going to hopefully find that we're not regressing and going back. What actually are those tests? And what does that mean? What kind of coverage does that mean, and what kind of risk does that mean? Because each of these different sets they cover different aspects of the application, and they have different meanings. I want to make sure that everybody on the team understands what the risk is with that. And we're going to a place in CD where instead of these giant multi-day regression suites, they've got to shrink down smaller. I'm going to go back a slide again. If we are shrinking down the amount of tests we run, and they are going to turn into smaller suites, which one of these definitions are we using, and what kind of risk does that open up? So that's regression. I want to bring up this idea of lean and lean software development. I wish I could talk about lean more. Maybe we'll do a session on lean one day. The main thing I want to bring up about lean is this the 7 lean principles. This idea of quality at every step. So this practice of quality at every step has a specific meaning in continuous delivery, and that's if you do something, test it, right? See that it works, move on to the next step. Make sure you're giving a consistent result, and that we're not blocking, or we don't know if we've kept the product at a deliverable level. So like you code, you test it, you build, you test it, you package it, you test it, you release it, you test it, you configure it, you test it, monitor, test, right? So it's this quality at every step. And CD, continuous delivery, is really built on that. So I have this Wikipedia definition that I'm not going to read the whole definition to you of continuous delivery, but it's this software engineering practice of really short cycles, whether you're going to production, you might still go to production on a daily basis, on a couple of hour basis, or still in a multi-day basis. You're taking a small chunk of code and pushing it through the whole production pipeline so that it's production ready. So you build, get some feedback, run some tests, get some feedback, deploy, run some tests, get some feedback, move from deploy to production, run some tests and get some feedback in a continuous basis, using tools like Jenkins and TeamCity, Bamboo, Excel Deploy, IBM Urban Code. But everybody knows these tools these days. At least you've heard about them and what they do. Part of this CD thing, and one of the things that make these tools so great, is that they can go and grab your tests. If you're using a tool that is, you have is hooked into these CD tools that Jenkins or IBM Urban Code can go and grab a set of a set of automated tests, rerun all those automated tests, and give back some go no go answer that, yeah, we can promote it to the next code, or we could promote it to this next staging environment, or we could promote it to production. Well, these things happen very fast. It's totally computer run, right? We're not going to be the ones starting that automation, and the tools aren't going to wait for an overnight set of tests. They want fast, quick, immediate feedback, right? One of the foundations of CD is getting immediate feedback. So it's kind of the dilemma we're facing. So the idea of running everything or having these giant automated suites run, we've got to move past that. And it's going to require some difficult choices for what are the kinds of tests we run, what are the tests we're going to run that are going to find bugs, what are the tests that we're going to run to show consistency, what are the tests that we're going to run to show that whatever we just changed is valid, we validated it, but also give immediate feedback, right? So not the tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of tests. We need a small, skinny suite. So test automation can no longer slow teams down, right? Test automation has to add value and has to be an asset to the development team to give immediate feedback, show that things are good, and we go on to the next state. There's a culture shift that happens in DevOps, and we know CD, continuous delivery, is part of this DevOps process. I don't want to get into the underpinnings of DevOps. That really deserves its own session for you to go to or reading about, but there's this idea, this cultural idea in DevOps, that everybody's working toward delivery. Everybody's working toward delivery, and if you're not working toward delivery, why are you on the project, right? Which is very different than even Agile. In Agile software development, the focus isn't on delivery and on deployment, right? We're focusing on the code, the focus is on the sprint, the focus is on the user story. In CD, the focus is on getting things to deployment. It's a different focus. Things always have to be deployment ready. So the as individual test teams, our focus needs to be on this test automation that's focused on deployment, and it's an asset to deployment. It's going to speed the team up rather than slowing the team down to deployment. So it's different mindset, different culture, right? So our job is to keep the team moving or stop them, right? If it's not only to keep the team moving, it is to stop them. If there's an issue, we're a quality checkpoint when we test it every step. If we enough tests to, if there's a bug, we're going to stop this from moving forward, go back and fix it, and move to the next stage. But we have to be an asset to deployment. So now that we know what some of the problems are, we know what CD is about, we know what regression is about, I want to move into some automation strategies for how we move forward. Many teams have actually never had an automation strategy. There was a team, and we had a couple of tool experts, so we had a couple of people working in this tool, and they knew how the tool worked. And we said, okay, go automate. And they just automated what they felt like automating. Like I said earlier, some people would automate just because they could. It's not because they were high-value tests. And over time, well-meaning, automated suites in many organizations have gotten bloated and slow. So I'm just thinking of the last STP conference I went to because we brought up STP, and I'm remembering some of the people that I met. And there was one guy at a big company that people would know the name of, and they had hundreds of thousands of automated tests running on thousands of virtual machines, and it was this constant state, and that's great. And at the lunch table, he was the only one that wasn't complaining about his automation. There was another company that their automation's a mess, and they were having these high failure rates, or their automation took 7 days to run, and the team was complaining that they make a change and they want to do a daily build, but the test team is stuck slowing the team down because their automation had gotten bloated and slow. And another person at the lunch table, the test lead said, I don't even know what's going on in the automation. That's the automation team. So the test team that's responsible for giving go, no-go answers and contributing to the definition of done, saying whether user stories are done, they weren't even doing the automation. The automation was handled by a different team, and they just didn't have a clue. But they knew that the automation was, the reason why they didn't have a clue was because the automation is slow, it's handled by another team. I think that a lot of people in the software development world these days are suffering under automated suites that are bloated and slow, bloated, big, and slow to run. So have to change that. We know we need a lot of automation, and CD depends on this automation, and we need automation at every step. So what we're going to need is to get rid of these bloated and slow automation suites and come up with better defined, like when I was talking about the definitions of regression, better defined, smaller suites that only run at exact certain times in exact certain environments. Like when we make a change, focus the tests on that change that was made. So there's an automation style issue that I want to bring up here that's gotten a lot of discussion lately. And that is, there's a big discussion happening with do you do atomic, small, isolated, decoupled tests, and you have a function and you test only that function, and you have an automated test just about that function? Or do you write workflow tests that can sometimes be spaghetti, like spaghetti code of multiple steps and multiple functions and multiple activities that are stringy tests that go on and on? But that's what real users do. They're real user scenarios. The atomic isolated tests, testing one function at a time, that's great. It might show that the function works, but that's never what your users do. Your users do workflows. They go from step 1 to step 2 to step 3, back to step 2, change the data, to step 3, back to step 2 to change the data, to step 3, 4, 5. So how do you handle this? And this is one of the issues I find teams have to tackle as they're trying to economize their automated suite and make their automated suite stronger, because too many teams have too many atomic decoupled tests and are missing bugs because they don't have workflow tests. So people could say these isolated functional tests, they should all be done at the unit level and not have those run at all at our like big automated tool UI level. Oh, why don't we do all our real world? Why don't we do all of our tests as real world workflow in automation? So the atomic tests, do it at the unit level. The bigger workflow tests, that's what we should be automating. The main reason why we don't do that, people are probably thinking that already, is because these workflow tests are harder to write. They're harder to automate. right? They also break more. They're more fragile. They break down more. If I'm testing 5 functions in a row in a workflow, anything could happen between any of those 5 functions, and the test breaks. It's harder to analyze. It's harder to go and figure out why. And if I have hundreds or I have thousands of tests that I'm going to run, if I have a whole bunch of scenarios breaking, they're hard to maintain, hard to write, and it's going to be a problem. So before we get too nervous about, oh my gosh, what is this guy saying? Everybody's telling me to do atomic tests, and now this guy is telling me that we have to do real life workflows. There's different reasons why we test. And remember back to test design, right? There are tests that we run to show that a single function is working through a UI, and it's going to give us the exact result we expect, right? So it's a single isolated function. I run that test. It does what it does. That's good. But there's also different tests that we run to show logic, that we test a handoff from one function to another function, or one function calls this API, goes to another function, touches that subsystem, right? That's a different style of testing. We run those tests, whether you call them, interoperability or integration tests or system level tests. There's different levels of tests, right? First a user does this, then a user does that. So there's a different style of testing happens. I'm not saying do away with the atomic tests, and I'm not saying do away with the workflow or spaghetti tests, right? They're different sets of tests that do different things. Both are essential. They show different things. The real distinction moving forward in automation is how much. How much of each one do you do, right? It's scale. Most teams wind up with more of the atomic tests, more of the isolated tests, but you can't leave out the scenarios. Right? We can't, because the automation, as an engineer, it's a whole lot easier for me to write an atomic test and just run one function in one form and it's done, and I've shown that that function works. That's easier. But we can't leave out the scenarios. We can't leave out a bigger percentage. I don't want to say bigger, more than 50%. And again, there's no magic percentage here. You may have 10% of your test B workflows. You may have 50% of your test B workflows. Part of what I'm talking about now is coming up with an automation strategy. So you come up with a strategy and you get team buy-in. You get team buy-in that includes the developers, that it also includes the PO though. It includes the product side where you say, okay, here's a bunch of scenarios. We want to automate these scenarios, but the scenarios are pain in the neck to automate and they break a lot. Is this enough scenarios or do you want more? So that's what I mean about coming up with a strategy, making decisions on what we're going to automate, how many of this type of test and how many of that type of test we're going to automate. So part of this automation strategy, this current topic of really isolated atomic tests or spaghetti code scenarios, longer, harder tests, decision that has to be made, right? And to me, the idea is balance. When I mentioned that certain tests could be run at the unit level, a lot of times when I go into organizations, I find out that there's teams that they don't have a good idea of what's run at the unit level and what we run at the UI level, and we have to mesh those things up. And I see that it's 9:45, and I'm going to pick up a little bit on walking through this. I brought up this idea of bloated and slow fat automation suites. Well, the idea that we're going to go toward is lean and mean automation and writing much more efficient automation. We need to refocus our big automated suites and make them skinnier, make them lean and mean. One of the things we have to do there is retire old tests. And this is a difficult topic to talk about with people. They get afraid of retiring tests. I mentioned a couple of situations earlier where people may have been automating in a certain tool for 10 years, 12 years, 5 years, or they were automating every acceptance criteria on a function that hasn't changed in years. They're reticent, they're slow in going back and getting rid of old tests. Well, if you just keep adding tests and adding tests and adding tests, at a certain point, the regression is going to get too big, bloated, and slow. We need to be better at going in and retiring tests, optimizing tests. For example, if you have a whole bunch of happy path tests, turn your happy path tests into boundary tests. They're still testing valid paths, but they're better at finding bugs and maybe reduce the number, right? It's also important in your automation strategy to tag, trace, and prioritize your tests. We know priorities, that's an easy one. But not only priorities at the immediate level, but priorities at this is a common workflow or this is a high risk area, so we're going to give this a high priority, and this is a lower priority. We also need to tag and trace, meaning you tag your tests to say it's on this function or it's on this use case or it's on this workflow, so that the example I gave earlier with hotfixes, if we have a hotfix, I can do a search for that function and pull out all of the tests and just optimize the tests I'm going to run and only run those tests. And trace using traceability, where you link your test cases or your automation back to chunks of code or back to user stories. So I know if I have a chunk of code that changes, I can go and quickly and easily pull out all the automated tests on that chunk of code if it's traced. Right, so it's a way to start moving from bloated and slow to lean and mean, getting rid of a bunch of tests, retiring tests, and being able to optimize our tests. There's also this idea of, I brought up, of having somebody else, having a tool run the tests and not you. There's a lot of teams that have a hard time handing over the running of their automation. And I'm going to leave this slide to you to look at to sort that out and move ahead. You could be thinking at this point, I have a really good framework. We do keywords, or we do action words, or we have this great page objects framework that's really good at helping me produce tests and maintain tests. But still, even if you have a great framework, that doesn't have an impact on old tests, on false positives and false negatives, on analysis time. You still have to have that argument about atomic and workflow tests. Just having a good framework doesn't prevent any of these problems. It's better test design that's going to solve it. So also, one more decision in this automation strategy piece is that when we were running tests by ourselves on our own system, running the automation was pretty free. Right? When we talk about the return on investment, and you say, well, how expensive is it to run tests? Well, that used to be free. Because I'm running it on my own system and I'm running it and it's just my time. But now with people running tests in the cloud, there's a cost to that. With running tests on, buying a service and running a test against 20 mobile devices every day, there's a cost to that. So running bloated and slow automated suites now costs money. Not only time. So the running test isn't free anymore. We need smaller focused tests. To do that, we need a better definition of regression, better automation goals, and design our suites better. So the solutions I want to present are, like a lot of applications that are big monolith things, we need to take these monolithic regression suites that's just a big, giant mess and break them down, clean them up, and get rid of this monolith and make a lot more smaller, good sets of tests, like have a smoke test, have a set of integrated tests, have a set of tests that only will test a mock API, and then have a set of tests that test a live API. So, for example, if in our production pipeline, we move from one place in the production pipeline where I have mocked APIs to the next step in the production line where we link out to our live APIs, you don't need to run a giant overnight set of regression tests every time you take a step. When you move to the place in your pipeline where you have the mocked APIs, you just run the tests that are about mocked APIs. That's it, and validate that, okay, adding in these APIs, they work. When you go to the next level and you're testing the live APIs, just run the automated tests that are going to test the live API and maybe a smoke test. But rerunning the giant automation suite doesn't happen anymore. So we want multiple lean and mean automated suites that are very directed in their purpose, right? I may have a specific set of tests that are only about mobile responsiveness, a specific smaller set of tests that's only about browser compatibility, a specific smaller set of tests that's only about database tests or only test the UI. So multiple suites of smaller tests. I just talked about that topic. You should all know this triangle. If you don't know this triangle, go read about it. Flipping the automation triangle from having an automation strategy or not having a strategy, but most of the tests get automated at the UI, to having most of the tests be automated lower level, whether they're automated at the unit level or the API level. Important part of moving from big, bloated, and slow automated suites to lean and mean, fast running suites. So rethinking our strategy. If you have very little automation, the solution I want to present to you is start now. There's so many tools out there. There's open source tools. There's really low cost tools. Start now. If you think you can't automate our product because it's too dynamic or something, get some help. Every application can have automation. Start now, but start by getting a good definition of regression, good goals for your automation. Start small by doing a smoke test and use some really small, simple methods like doing data-driven testing where you have a small number of scripts but you pump lots of data through, or just a small number of end-to-end or workflow tests, and tag, trace, and prioritize well. If you're one of these companies that is moving to CD, you need to overhaul your automation suite probably. If you're already considering going to CD, you probably have a big number of automated tests. Be ruthless and merciless about cutting tests. Your goal should be lean and mean. Everything about automation should be lean and mean. Use traceability and tagging wherever you can, and make sure that you're focused on what gets tested at the unit level and API level. As we talk so much about CD and DevOps, testers know that we need to optimize our automated suites. There's also a lot of pressure on developers to do TDD, do a whole lot more unit testing and a whole lot more API testing, that in a lot of organizations, there wasn't so much pressure on developers to do that. Well, now that they're doing more unit testing and more API testing, maybe you could cut down on the amount of testing you do through the UI. So shrink that triangle, right? If you're not moving to CD, you still need to overhaul your tests, in my opinion. If you do have a big automated suite, do those things to get down to a skinnier, leaner, meaner organization set of automated tests, right? Define an economic automation strategy. Focus on lower level tests. Right, optimize your automation suite. So to summarize, just get a better grip on your automated test suite, right? Whatever you are on the automation spectrum, get a better grip on it. Don't just automate because you can, right? Define what success would look like and create a strategy around it. Be more selective and make smarter choices about what you automate instead of this, 75% or automate everything you can. Spring cleaning, regularly go in and clean out stale tests, clean out retired user story tests, update tests. If you've had a function that's been in production for 5 years and you don't have a lot of issues around it, re-examine all those tests and maybe take 50 automated tests down to 5 automated tests, right? Be ruthless, but go in and spring clean out your tests and stay on a diet. The focus with automation is lean and mean, right? It's not bloated and slow. Know your tests, use traceability, use tagging, use priorities. Small is beautiful, smaller suites is better. Keep your automation simple, and remember that the automation is not included in, the author is not included in automation these days, right? So if I'm writing all the tests, I need to count on not me running the tests. I need to count on a tool or somebody else running my automation suite, but not me, right? So design your tests so that somebody else can run them, analyze them, and troubleshoot them. All right, that's it. So I'm all set.
And thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. I'll just try to. There are a couple of questions, so let's first quickly take them, and then.
I hope the first question isn't why did you talk so fast?
No. Okay, so the first question is, hi, Michael. Appreciate. I guess he's saying about the session, but please provide clarity on continuous integration, continuous delivery, CI/CD is correct, or continuous integration, continuous deployment, CI/CD is correct. Like he's asking whether that CI/CD is correct or this one. Is CI/CD, are these two things overlapped or three things? Integration, delivery, deployment. Just before you say something, Michael, I'm going to add something here so that even my doubts are clear. What I believe is continuous integration is when you have a distributed team and everybody is, kind of committing the code. Deployment is when you're putting the build on the production, and delivery is when you're actually opening up that piece of code for the customers.
Okay, so this is an area where we really need a lot of clarity. And I said you probably need a separate session on DevOps. I actually did a session on DevOps at STP about 2 years ago. So CI is about builds. We call this the continuous. There's this whole continuous spectrum, this whole continuous suite. Continuous integration is really about builds. It's it's build automation. It's whether it's a distributed team or you just have multiple developers, when they commit a code, you're continuously integrating the code. So you don't have to wait. We don't have to wait a week. We're not doing weekly builds anymore. We can continuously integrate where we can do daily builds, or we can even do builds every hour, or we can do builds every time there's a commit. So every time there's a commit, new chunk of code gets added, we can pull a build and rerun unit tests and rerun our smoke test and then deploy it. We're continuously integrating. Now, a bunch of organizations move continuous integration. If I was using a tool like Jenkins, which has so many, can do so many things, not only can it move it to a build server, but it can move it to a test server. We can run a bunch of tests. We can move it to staging server. That's when you're starting to talk more about continuous delivery, that we are taking these code changes, we're validating them as they go, and we can start delivering these chunks of code further and further into the development pipeline. When you get to continuous deployment is we go from continuous delivery to saying we have this chunk of code, we've integrated it, we've delivered it, it's done. Continuous deployment is actually moving it to deployment, moving it to the production environment. And the difference between continuous delivery and continuous deployment is because for CDs, they're somewhat the same. Continuous delivery is finishing that chunk of code, but you stop there, and then at some point the business will decide, because DevOps is a business-driven process, the business will decide, okay, we have this function, and now we can move it to deployment. It's ready, the customer wants it, so now we're going to move it to deployment. Continuous deployment is not only is it finished and delivered, but then it's an automatic move to deployment, which is actually a big difference, that you could have a chunk of code that's worked on in a sprint, it's finished, it's put into the CI build, and it automatically by a tool will go mechanically without any humans touching it all the way through a testing server, automated test get run, all the way to a staging server, a different set of tests get run on a different environment with maybe live APIs and live database, and then if the tests all pass, it can automatically be put out to deployment based on a tool. So it's continuous deployment is we take these small chunks of code going through the entire automated development pipeline all the way to production. That's continuous deployment. I really think if you're going to it, I'm talking about continuous delivery in this session today. It could be about continuous deployment, but go learn those terms. Go learn that CI, CD, continuous testing, continuous deployment, continuous monitoring. It's just in software development today, we need to understand what all those continuous terms mean. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you, Michael. That was pretty helpful. Jane Fraser here says, thank you. As usual, you have given her some new ideas and reminder on some she knew and forgot. So time for a reset for her automation, she says. And she also asks, why did you talk so fast?
Why did I talk so fast? Because I know myself that I'm trying to get a lot done in an hour. I always want to give everybody as much information as I can. I always want to put out a lot of information.
So here's your next question. It says, in your experience, where is the best place for the strategy, at the application team level or enterprise level?
Wow.
Or should it be a two-tiered process, enterprise level strategy base with customization at the app level?
I absolutely, that's a very good question, and I'm going to agree with the last suggestion that that is two-tiered. At the enterprise level, you can say we want to automate as much as we can and have good, clear ideas about getting help for automated teams and how you're going to automate and what the pipeline is going to look like and what the tools are and how the tools are going to be integrated. But it really is low level at the individual application level, at the individual team level, where you say, okay, this function is it's just better tested at the unit level, or this test, it's too hard to maintain the unit testing harness, and this framework is too difficult, so we're going to test it at the API level. Or it's just a whole lot faster and quicker if we run it at the UI level, but we have to be careful to run the right test at the UI level. Making those kind of decisions really is low level, it's application level, it's team level. So it's a great suggestion to have it be two-tiered. The enterprise has goals, enterprise has a vision, but at the application level, you're going to have a strategy about where you automate and what you automate.
Makes sense. So there are tons of appreciation, Michael, but since we're running short of time, I'm going to ask you one more question, and then all the questions other than this one, the last one that I'm going to ask audience, we will send them to Michael, and Michael will be able to respond us back with the answers, and we are going to.
I just popped my email address up if anybody wants to ask me a question. So thank you, Smita.
Yeah, we are only going to export them from here and send it to you, and you can send us the responses and they'll be put on as a blog. So the last question here is, how can a test automation tool automatically update Jira user story or Rally user story or test management tool. How have companies you consulted did automatically update user story as soon as automation test run was complete in continuous integration and yeah, CI/CD?
I'm not sure what that means to automatically update the user story after an automated suite was run. I'm not sure what that means. Usually when the automated suite is run and the tests have passed, it'll go in and update a tool like Jenkins or IBM Urban Code. It'll update the pipeline tool. The running the automated tests won't automatically go back and update a user story. I'm not sure why it would. I But usually they don't. If I run an automated set of tests, it's not going to go back and update something in Jira. It's going to go, more importantly, it's going to keep the pipeline running and update. It's going to report back to the team that's running Jenkins or XL Deploy or one of these pipeline automation tools. I'm not sure what they mean by updating the user story.
Mm-hmm. Would there, Fabian is trying to help us with there, would there be any means to set a message in the user story ticket in Jira? So with the test results, any kind of such mode?
Well, if you have a test case management tool like maybe in Jira, maybe in Rally, maybe in Microsoft Test Manager and TFS, when I run an automated test, each individual test will pass or fail. Right. So if a test passes and that we're using traceability, we're using linking, if I go to that user story, I would know that every automated test linked to that user story passed, it would do that. Automated tools can easily do that if you're using traceability. That if is a big if. Oh, I wish we could talk more about traceability, but we don't have time. If I've traced my automated tests back to a specific user story, it will automatically go update and say, okay, if you have this user story, here are 20 automated tests for that user story, and 15 tests passed and 5 tests failed. And if you're using traceability, it would automatically do that.
Okay, so yeah, we are really running out of time. So
okay.
Yeah, thank you so much, Michael. Really,
Thank you. And let me apologize one more time. If I did talk too fast, I know that STP records these and you can play it back again. You can pass it to your friends or go back to the STP site and look at the slides. And even if I talk too fast, I'm sorry, but it's now all recorded and it's going to be on the STP site, right?
Yes, it's going to be there. Well, everyone, this concludes our webinar for today. Thanks for joining and most importantly, asking for these questions and being so engaging and making the most of the webinar for everyone. If you want to see more of these demos or learn about CI/CD, do come over to STPCon Spring 2018. And again, those who are planning to attend the conference, please do not forget to book your rooms at the Marriott Hotel while they are still offering their special rates, which is $199 per night. The offer is going to expire on 16th March or until the rooms sell out. Stay tuned for more webinars and online trainings coming soon at SoftwareTestPro.com. And if you haven't yet signed up for the upcoming webinar, which is Supercharge Your Functional Tests with Visual Powers in 8 Lines of Code by Gil Thayer on 14th of March, then the link is up for registrations at SoftwareTestPro.com. Please go ahead and register yourself. Thank you, everyone. Have a great week ahead. See you all in California in April 2018. Happy learning. Have a great day ahead.